evening, everybody. Hi, Cheryl. All right, this is Learn with the League, organized by the League of Women Voters of Ames and Story County. And I am Mary Sand. I'm a member of the League, and we have a packed program tonight because we have two presentations. First one will be discussing the League priorities and the legislative session, and the second one will be on criminal justice reform, the work done by a longstanding League committee. And I have the honor this evening of introducing our speakers. Amy Campbell, who has lobbied for the League of Women Voters of Iowa for over 20 years at the State House, and every single spring she generously comes here to give us an update on what happened and maybe some thoughts on next session.
Yeah.
So let's take it away, Amy. Welcome.
Well, hopefully Beth will be nicer to me than Herman is. Just kidding. Welcome. I like that it's Learn with the League, because I actually learn a lot more when I come to the League meetings around the state than I do when I'm sitting up at the Capitol, listening to legislators. But I was trying, every year I try to summarize what the legislature felt like, and I don't even know how to describe this year. I thought last year might have been the weirdest year I've ever had, but then this year, I always kind of go back and forth between, I want things to happen quickly at the Capitol, I want things to get done, but yet when you do things quickly, you make lots of mistakes, and that's, I think, what we might have done this year, is acted a little too quickly on things some people wanted to have done, like AEA reform, like behavioral health reform, which was a little bit more, there was a longer process that involved stakeholders in that, but still was a lot of changes that really needed a little bit more thought. For instance, in the behavioral health reform, they are going to have a transition plan by July 1. A lot of the questions that people had would have been answered in a transition plan that had we done the planning first and the legislation second, I think it would have made a lot more sense for people. So there just seems to be a rush, and I'm not sure why we always feel so rushed to do policy. I tell people it takes 3 to 5 years to get something done. This year was, like most years, 10% of the bills that were introduced passed to the governor's office. I've been tracking that every year in my 30-some years, and it's always between 10 and 13%. There's a couple outliers. One was 8, one was 15%, but it's always around 1 out of 10 bills get passed. So it takes a lot of time, and it's not like we didn't introduce a lot of bills. There were 1,600 bills introduced this year in just the short 100-day session. So lots of ideas, not many things passed. So I wanted to go through, I'm glad you distributed the priorities, because that's how I kind of structured my comments around those priorities. Many of you probably got my report today. I was trying to hold off until the governor was signed everything, and then I just thought, I'm just going to go ahead and send it out now, because I think she's probably going to sign everything. Budget bills have been signed. There's just a few other things still out there. But I wanted to talk about voting first. So it's good news this year, because they didn't do the voting bill that they were planning on doing. Now, Representative Wessel Crochelle had to endure the debate on the House side, because the House did pass it. Party line vote, Democrats against, Republicans for, a bill that would have eliminated drop boxes for ballots. The person in charge of that continually talks about how we have drop boxes everywhere. They're called postal boxes. Well, I actually don't know the last time I've seen a blue postal box on a corner of somebody's street without going to the post office. I don't see those around very often. And people don't trust that the mail is going to get there in time. So they like the convenience of a ballot drop box, which they narrowed in previous years to only being able to have those at county courthouses. But this bill would have eliminated those entirely, required auditors to have more envelopes for mail-in ballots, and required those envelopes be specifically printed with election-specific information, meaning they'd have to throw them all out after each year, versus printing them in batch and having them for each year. It's a terrible waste of money. And then also required your voter ID to be put on that. So if you're confused and don't know what your voter ID is, you might put your social security number down. It is not, it's your driver's license or a special number that you get if you don't have a driver's license. So definitely will lead to some confusion for people. And I think a lot of Iowans would think, well, why can't I just write my social security number there? I know that, but you can't. So it would have done that. And then it would have required mail-in ballots be received by the night before the election. So right now it's before the polls close. This would mean when your auditor's office closes on that Monday night at 5 o'clock or 4:30, that would be the cutoff to be received. So it just is another attack, this time on mail-in voting. And it's disappointing. They did originally change the enactment date so it wouldn't affect this election. But then I think they just decided, why bother doing it? If it's not going to affect this election, we'll do it next year. They will do it next year. So be prepared, more attacks on voting. Unfortunately, one of the bills that the Secretary of State was really interested in doing it was modeled after a Colorado program that would have allowed people who are blind or low vision to be able to vote privately without somebody's assistance in their home. So there's some kind of a electronic ballot that you can get at your home to vote privately, so you don't have to have somebody assist you. It didn't pass, got a lot of discussion, but there was a problem with some of the way it was written, and the National Federation for the Blind did not like the way it was written, so they asked that it be held back for another year. I think the Secretary of State's office really does want to try to pilot that, so he sees a lot of opportunity there. So I think for people that want to have that privacy to vote and happen to be blind or have low vision, that might be an option for people if they don't want to go to the auditor's office or somewhere, satellite site. Are you seeing me okay on the camera there?
Oh, yeah.
Okie doke, just double checking. I also wanted to note, well, there was a cleanup bill that passed this year. Nothing big. Auditors had a lot of cleanup in code, passed by unanimously in both the House and the Senate. So I don't want to say there wasn't any voting bills passed, but at least it wasn't the really bad one. So I hate it when my reporting of good news is, hey, they didn't do this, didn't pass this. The House did, but not because of the legislators in this room. So transparency. I just want to say a couple of things overall. Legislature, I'm so happy that they have continued the video subcommittee meetings and video committee meetings. That gives you an opportunity when there's an issue that you care about, let's say the death penalty, which was not debated this year, that you want to check in and see what they're saying. You can do that. The Senate took it a step further. You can still participate online. I wish the House would do that again, because if you're an expert on a specific issue that lives in Dubuque and don't want to drive down for a 15-minute meeting, that's a great opportunity for you to be able to participate. Or even from Ames, you've got work or other commitments. You might not want to take the time to go down there and risk it being canceled at the last minute and use your time. So it's a really great thing. Unfortunately, neither House nor Senate has budget meetings anymore. None of them meet, other than once to go over the governor's budget and once to pass. Well, some of them didn't even meet to pass the budget. Huh?
We met.
Your budget committee?
Justice system.
Oh Yeah, you did. You did. The HHS met once.
House only, not the Senate.
Yeah, the House only. You did have a couple meetings. That's not the norm.
Just do the governor's budget?
Yeah, so when I first started being lobbying, of course, Senator Hammond was the chair, or maybe ranking member, chair, one of the two. And they used to have twice weekly meetings of the budget early in session. And you'd have not just the department come in, but you might have a child care provider come in and talk about child care, or you might have somebody who's on a waiver waiting list talk about Medicaid waivers. You'd have organizations come in and talk. They don't do that anymore. You might get the department presenting, you might get like the Attorney General or somebody presenting, but you're not going to get like the Human Trafficking Task Force presenting on their findings over the summer. It's unfortunate because I learn a ton of things from those meetings. I learned what questions legislators have. I could plant questions for legislators to ask. I could hear where somebody's got an idea that I follow up on. You also learn a lot about what those budget line items are. What is Thrive Iowa? I still don't know what Thrive Iowa is, but it's a new initiative we're going to spend $3 million, $5 million on, that the governor is going to connect people to services. Still don't have a clue on that because HHS never met to talk about the line items in the budget. So for me, that's a lack of transparency. And that is unfortunate because I think that's the only way sometimes minority party members find out what's going on too. So it's disappointing. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done to clean up the legislature and its processes. And they've made movements to being more accessible, but also stepped back. Now, at least the House still has door people. The Senate got rid of theirs except for a couple, and you literally cannot find a way to get a note into the legislators sometimes after 5 o'clock at night. Unless you have their cell phone, I can't peek in the room. I have to go up to the bill room and hand the pages a note because they don't have a doorkeeper standing out there anymore. So if you know the Senate, that's up several stairs. If you're in a wheelchair or have access issues, you're going to have to ask somebody to come and help you get your note into your legislator. That to me is not access. House hasn't done that, so that's good. And as long as... So I'm going to give them a pretty poor grade on transparency. I will say that also getting rid of boards and commissions, to me, is a lack of transparency. That is where Iowans get to have a say in the processes of government. And by reducing people that are on those boards, getting rid of the gender balance, and,
That was mine.
Yeah, getting rid of the gender balance, which we had no option. I mean, it was just going to be done. There was no fighting that one this year. And then, eliminating all those boards and commissions, that's concerning to me, because that is a way to get people engaged in their government. And I don't think, sure, every governor has issues with trying to find the right people for the boards and commissions. It is hard, but every other governor has had a boards and commissions person that has reached out to organizations to get it. It's just this administration seems to have a difficult time reaching out to find the people that they want. Now, I have heard, I've not checked, but I have heard from pretty credible sources that you'll notice that a lot of the boards and commissions are balanced with independents and Republicans and a few Democrats. Someday I'm going to go in and look and see if that's true, but it came from the Interfaith Alliance, so I'm hoping that that's true. But I would also mention that there were some changes this year to open meetings. to make them a little stronger penalty on those, to update those laws, and then also exempted if you're at a political gathering, a political party gathering like a caucus. You happen to have 4 supervisors that are all Republicans in the same room, that does not count. So it was just more clarifying. And then I would also notice there was some changes with the public notices. So the newspaper publishing is becoming more challenging as newspapers close and aren't meeting the minor qualifications. So they've passed a bill that the Newspaper Association will have a public portal for all public notices that are going into newspapers. And then if a newspaper has an online, they're still going to publish, but if they have an online service, they have to have that free and open to the public to be able to access that. So it can't be buried behind their subscriber wall. It has to be open to the public. It has to be searchable for public notices. So that's something we'll probably want to keep an eye on to see how that's implemented. There wasn't a lot of discussion on that. So I will admit I missed the debate in the House, but it did seem to go through with, after a lot of work with the Newspaper Association to try to deal with that and to try to keep it from making it that you won't ever publish it in a print newspaper. But okay, education. How much time do we got? Yeah, AEAs. Talk about burning down the house. It's this was something that the governor did without really talking to her members. I'm just going to say that. The House in particular was quite upset with how far the governor went with her special education AEA transformation, and for a long time were the holdouts on this. The final, I think the House members would have preferred to just have a task force and come back with recommendations, but that was a non-starter for the governor. So they compromised with having a task force, but also she got her Division of Special Education, which might not be a bad thing to have better oversight over the special education system. There will be people placed in the AEAs that are education staffers. But this is a new trend that's odd to me, is the moving to a very strong state government-centric decision-making. So a lot of the changes that you're seeing are consolidating sort of power and into the state and having a very strong state government, which I'm old school, doesn't seem like the Republican Party I know. But very, not local government, very, like everything at the state level, AEAs, you saw it with community-based corrections last year. You're gonna see it with public health next year. That's the next one to bring in and have districts, behavioral health. So there's this real centralization of decision-making at the state level and very little local control anymore. So local control is kind of not something people talk about anymore, which is strange. So, except on specific certain things, you might have that happen. But you also can't have local control in doing things like guaranteed income programs or, I'm trying to think of the other, I just had another one on my top of my head, but they're just kind of trying to make everything uniform without giving any local autonomy to the discussion. So also, and these are things Craig would say too. It's not just, I'm not intending to be partisan in my comments because Craig and I have talked a lot about the same thing, and obviously he's the other party of me, but also reproductive rights. Thankfully, nothing happened this year, which I'm sad that, again, the governor could not get her contraceptive access over-the-counter access passed. Democrats did introduce a couple bills that would have made contraception and emergency contraception for victims available from the Victim Compensation Fund, something that the Attorney General decided not to do anymore with those funds. So there were some other things that would have been good proactively. In terms of women's health, there were insurance mandates that require biomarker testing, so for cancers and certain things. Also breast cancer, making sure that breast cancer examinations and diagnostic examinations are covered. So by insurance, I didn't realize there were some insurance companies not paying for all of those exams. So also, I guess the really good news, which is also has a bad side, is that the legislature passed the 12-month expansion of postpartum Medicaid coverage. So a woman who is pregnant and get on Medicaid right now would only have 60 days after birth, which we all know that's that's nothing. This would extend it to 12 months, but that makes us the 48th state to do that. On the downside, to do it, they had to lower eligibility from 375% of the federal poverty level to 215%. So fewer women will be able to access that service. In doing so, it also moved kids to the Hawkeye program, Children's Health Insurance Program, and it doesn't cover some of the, they call it EPSDT, it's early screening diagnostic something, I don't remember what all of it is, but it's a lot of your well child stuff. So there was some concerns that that is not a covered benefit, and it's something that HHS has said they will help start working on to see if they can make exceptions to make sure that some of these kids would have access to those really preventive screenings that you get in that first year of life. So, so that, it's a downside, but also we were the top of the nation at 375% eligibility. I love the Catholic Conference's comments that it's okay to be #1 on women's and children's health. It's okay to be the best for pregnant moms. It's all right to be at the top, but 215 puts us kind of in line with our surrounding states, so it's kind of hard to match it apples to apples because each state does it a little bit differently, but I guess that was the one strong piece that came out is some women will now have longer access to those services, so they'll get their behavioral health, their good, healthy mom, healthy baby, they'll be able to access that. Human trafficking, unfortunately, a lot of the human trafficking stuff that was recommended did not get passed, but they did pass a bill that will will change the definition of victim to include victims of human trafficking so they can access all of the services and counseling and the things that a victim of rape or domestic violence can access. So all of the specialized court support and all of the other supports that are available, housing support, whatever that might be. So they did expand that, and they made a few changes to policy, but not the bigger changes that the Human Trafficking Task Force had recommended. A lot of which included like making sure there was safe harbor so people didn't get charged with their crimes that were arising from being trafficked. That didn't pass. So I know that we have a strong supporter of human trafficking in the Judiciary Budgets chair, Brian Losey. His daughter works in human trafficking too, and he's very keenly aware of that. So environment, I really had to dig for something that might have happened there. Well, we got more money for trails, $1 million more, some more money for public transit, which of course is good because one of the things I think is great is that, and this was a Democratic bill, Representative Zabner from Iowa City introduced a bill that makes required the Department of Natural Resources to review state parks and rec areas and make sure they're accessible to people with disabilities and older Iowans. Not only did they pass that, but they put $1.3 million in the budget to do it. So, I mean, that's a great way to connect people to their environment by making it more accessible to all. But there's nothing else to report on environment, good or bad.
$250,000 to do a study on how much water we have left.
Oh,
I thought that was huge. It hasn't happened since I started, so.
wow.
Yeah.
Is that the one from the Blufflands?
ADNR.
I know they gave something to the University of Iowa on floodplains, I thought. I'll have to go back and look.
Specifically to look at state access to water. It was like the biggest thing I've seen happen in the environment since.
See? Learn with the league.
It happened at the very end,
I'll have to go back and look for that. Yeah, I missed that one, so that is good.
It is good. They wanted 500, but they got 250.
Still, I mean,
In
as
this
much
environment, that's great.
as hard as it is to find money anymore. Speaking of money, they did not spend any of the opioid dollars again. So I just read today, the governor put out a press release that she's spending some federal dollars on things related to opioids, including the Cambridge site for YSS. Their treatment facilities gets $3 million, and some infrastructure, like a grant program for infrastructure. It's like $17 million. I believe it's old unused ARPA funds, federal funds that she's using. I didn't dig deep enough into that, but I think she said there's $47 million now on the opioid settlement that is not spent because we can't agree. And this is Republicans can't agree. The Senate wanted to give the departments complete authority over how to spend the dollars, and the House wanted to have a stakeholder advisory committee review and decide where those dollars should be spent. I believe the House passed a bill that kind of compromised and added a few line items for things they knew that the governor and the Senate wanted, and the Senate sent it back without any of that, without the advisory council. So it died in the final days of session because they could not come to agreement on that. It was frustrating because I think everybody agreed on the earmarks. It was just whether you have an advisory council, and it's still an advisory council. So that was disappointing. I saved guns for last. I know it's probably last on our list here too, it is. But there were a lot of good, smart gun control, gun safety bills introduced that got no discussion. Because they were minority party introduced, and they pretty much got assigned a subcommittee and never were talked about. So there were 2 bills that did pass, and I think you've read about them, the school security bills, and the league was opposed to them. Arming teachers and school employees with special training. I don't know the impact of that, actually. It sounds really good to some people on paper, the people that want things like that. But from my understanding is no insurance company is ever going to insure a school that does that. So it really came down to more of an urban-rural split where rural schools were more interested. Well, rural citizens were more interested in that. I won't say the schools were because I think they had shared concerns. And then they also passed, it's a package of 2 bills that included grant money to help pay for the training, as well as a firearm detection system, an alarm system that would direct into 911. But my understanding is the software program that they said schools can use is a single source. So it was a specific company came in to lobby for funding for that. And I think that's very concerning to people too, that there's no transparency, give money to this organization. They did that on another thing too with a psychiatric medical institution for children. $3 million showed up in the budget to bring in a Florida company to take care of kids that have sexualized behaviors and other difficult behaviors, rather than just, paying our providers here better and giving them the regulation relief that they're giving this company to be able to do that. So there were some things slipped into those budgets that maybe you would have gotten a heads up had you had a meeting ever about those things, other than 1 or 2 meetings in specific committees. But I'm hopeful that we have some changes in leadership of committees, that maybe that will open it back up to more meetings like you had with Justice Systems. He's a much more open kind of guy, Representative Losi, so much more interested in working together than creating divisions. So I think there's some opportunities there, but I think the school safety one just really kind of sucked the air out for a lot of people at the Capitol. And those poor school lobbyists, they had just been hammered and hammered and hammered on the AEA stuff all session long, and then this. So I don't think I hope it's not hard for people to realize safer schools doesn't mean more guns in schools. So hopefully, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I've lost my mind. Johnny, come back. I miss the days of Johnny. I didn't talk about the behavioral health bill, but there was a lot of, stakeholder involvement leading up to that. There's just a massive change, so it would have been nice to do it in a little bit slower. But we are going to change our mental health and disability services regions to being behavioral health districts, and there's a map of 6 that's suggested. I would guess it's probably going to be pretty accurate. I don't think this region changes much in terms of there's a few counties that would get taken from the regions, and I think maybe you add a couple, but that's some of them go to the central Iowa region, and some are not very happy about joining Polk, but we'll see how that goes. But that is the map you're going to watch, because I've heard it multiple times, public health is next. So the 99 public health county health system will be next to merge, and I'm guessing it'll be close to those behavioral health districts. Nobody's said that, but everything that they say is we want to have consolidation. Same with early childhood is another one they want to look at. There was another one, EMS I think is the other one. So I think you're going to start to see a lot of that continued kind of district reorganization, more state oversight. Could be oversight, it could be control, it depends on who's at the top, right? And that's always what the concern is. Sure, we love this director now, but what about the next director? Or the next governor, or the next, what happens the next time around? So that's something that will be watched, and there's undoubtedly going to be some need to make changes next year as well. Especially on the disability side. A lot of the disability services that regions provide are those that help with employment, and they're moving those to an aging system. And there's no detail in the bill on that, so I'm really concerned about how that process goes. Especially since you have the aging system only deals with adults, and they'll have to start dealing with children as well. So it's a big change that we're going to have to watch. And then being in this community, I'm sure you heard about the anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion language that came out of in the education bill. Seems like the universities have really good plans to address that. I'm sure that they'll get slapped for it, but that was another disappointing piece. I'm way over time. I did talk longer than I thought, so I wanted to save time for questions because everybody wants to hear Johnny. So
Questions? Or do you have your written questions on your phone?
I just have a question. I'm unsure about this curriculum writing thing. I mean, who's in control? I just read something about that today, and then I couldn't understand exactly what they are saying. Am I for it or am I against it? Because there was something about Brad Zahn at the bottom that he entered this thing, and I couldn't tell from this article whether that passed or didn't pass. This group that
Yeah,
was trying to-
it did.
Okay.
And I should have made note of that too. That bill, I don't even know where to begin with that. The list of things that you're supposed to is this the social studies one? Yeah, the list of things that you're supposed to teach third graders should be in college curriculum. The type of things that are listed under that, reading Alexis de Tocqueville, really, I mean, has anybody picked that up recently? I know my sixth grader or seventh grader would not be able to grasp the concepts of that. Yeah.
So this is just for third graders?
No, they have it for every level, but it gets increasingly difficult and very specific and very white male perspective. They threw a woman or two in there just, or, the occasional African American, but no, it's I mean, you're not going to teach about FDR, the only president that had a disability, or physical disability, but you're going to teach about certain other, Reagan, I think was on the list, wasn't he? I can't remember.
So is it the barefoot and pregnancy thing, barefoot and pregnant thing that for women or?
Probably. Well, it's all about, people are just not learning the basics of being an American in school anymore. So we got to teach them what patriotism is. And
civilization was stressed in this article.
yeah, well, and it's very Western civilization oriented. It's, that to me was probably the most, that bill is hard to swallow and also hard to understand, and I have no clue how schools are going to comply with it.
And what data did they use to cover this?
Oh, they didn't, no. They thought it sounded good. Most of these bills come from national organizations, so you can pretty much track them all over the state, all over the country. There'll be bills popping up that are the same all over. I mean, that's always happened a little bit, like the National Conference of State Legislatures would do research, and actually come up with a model policy that they show to states based on the research. So it might be juvenile justice reform or something. But now you got groups that are just putting stuff together that sounds good. There's not really research backing it.
So is there a lot of discussion when these things are put up?
There was. But again, you had AEA stuff just overwhelming the school systems. And that broke very late in session. Finally, they got a compromise on it. So everything else sort of fell in place. So I think it was just overwhelming the education system that you can't fight every battle as intensely as you can. So, yes, sorry.
Yeah, pardon my cynicism. If you try to follow the money on a lot of these reforms, who's profiting and what influence do they have?
That's a good question. Americans for Prosperity comes to mind immediately. Farm Bureau. They're not people that would be. Alex, yeah, it's the sort of conservative version of the National Conference of State Legislatures, although NCSL wasn't liberal, so I don't understand that, but I'm sure if you, I mean, like on those specific earmarks, you see specific companies gaining money without any real discussion about it, whether it's good or bad or otherwise. I mean, the bill I talked about with voting also would have banned ranked choice voting before we even really have a discussion about it. But they got to ban it, even though we can't do it now anyway. Got to explicitly ban it. And that's one of those things that I don't think it should be a partisan issue. So I don't know. Yes.
Was there any discussion at all about cleaning up Iowa's water?
Well, apparently we get a little bit of money.
So just measuring the amount that we have,
Oh,
not whether
okay.
it's clean or not. That's-
No.
But I've had constituents ask me for years to measure the amount that we have, because
Yeah.
we haven't done that in forever. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we're not cleaning it up.
No, and it's going to be another really hot summer, I hear. So that probably means algae blooms and all kinds of stuff that it's so sad. I own kayaks and a canoe, and I don't ever want to go into the lakes here. We go to Minnesota.
Excuse me, I want to go back to the rate chat, the voting.
Yeah.
Because I was following that and I thought that it did not pass, but I'm hearing you say that it did pass.
No, it did not.
Oh, thank
That
you.
was one of the ones that, it was in that bill that didn't pass, which was my good news is that it didn't pass. But I had forgotten to mention ranked choice, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, League had some great people come to the Capitol to speak about that, so. I was very appreciative of that. Did I miss anything to my legislators here that fact check me?
There's so much, but the main points.
Any other questions?
Too. Thanks. I always think I'm going to talk for 10 minutes and then I.
Well, Amy, I am glad you're staying because part of this message is for you.
Oh, good.
Well, let me ask, how many of you have ever heard of William Wilberforce? Anybody know William? All right, Mary knows. Good. There are some that know. Well, I just recently discovered him a couple of weeks ago. Our pastor brought him up in a sermon. And as he described him, I said, hey, this ought to be our guiding star for the group that we have been in here in Ames, because he was persistent. He was really persistent. He was a member of Parliament back in the late 18th century and early 19th century, and for 28 years, he tried to abolish slavery. He was persistent, like the League of Women Voters, right? I mean, think how long it took us to get the vote. So William Wilberforce is my inspiration. Now, what you may not know is that 20 years ago, the League adopted a study on sentencing reform. We've been meeting ever since. And that's not well known, I think, that we've been meeting ever since. And it's a group right now of about 15 to 20 people that get together by Zoom once a month. Well, what we've done is put together a priority list of legislation that fits in with the consensus that we adopted in 2005. And we sent it down to Amy and say, here, you take care of this, Amy. And that's, that's really about all we do, because the legislation is never drafted. I think sentencing reform is really not a very sexy subject. And so we don't really get much opportunity to even lobby about it, but we always hope that, that Amy will take care of it. She has lots to take care of. Well, so last year, every year we send out that priority list. And last year, in January of 23, we looked at that and said, okay, what are our issues this year? And then we said, no, we're not going to get anything. Why should we bother to put together that list? And one of our groups said, well, are there things in those priorities that make for better sentencing policy that we can do at the local level? And just don't bother to send anything into the legislature, but look at what we can do locally that doesn't require legislation to do it. So that's the criteria. You have to have something that doesn't require the legislature, that you can adopt good policies at the local level. They said, yeah, we'll do that. And so the 6 of us who are members of that larger committee, who are also Ames Story County people, got together and strategized. And we developed some ideas. And I think it's working. We don't have great accomplishments at this point, but what we do have is good relationships with the people that can make those good policies, and they know where we are. And I think they are thinking, some of them, about how can we make this a better place for sentencing reform. Now, what I want you to think about is not go on with sentencing reform, but the real point is, do you have a consensus statement that you worked hard to adopt, and the committee did a lot of research, and it sits idle, because again, there's nothing for Amy to do there on that, nothing offered, but it's something good that you'd like to see done, that maybe it could be done at the local level. Think about that. And that's really the point of this. What we did was develop a document, and I have a few copies there if you're really interested in that. A document that can go out to every League of Women Voters group in the state of Iowa to think about whether they have something that would be a good thing to work on at the local level, because we can make it better at the local level too. Well, I'm going to turn this over to Mary. Bless her, she just got from play practice to here. And she's going to tell you about the 2 issues that we selected.
What we were trying to do is think of what's an issue that we could look at just ourselves and try this process out to see whether we could do something locally. So one of the suggestions that we eventually adopted was, well, let's see what kind of policies there are about traffic stops. You know, we'll talk with our sheriffs and our police chief and the ISU police chief and that sort of thing. And so we did that, and we had very nice conversations with all 3 of those people and discovered that we really had started out looking at the whole process wrong, because it wasn't, you know, what do? You know, have you counted up, you know, your traffic stops? It really wasn't a process like that. We ended up discovering that they really helped us more to show other leagues how you might approach a problem that you see in your community. And so what we've tried to do with our, the handout that we have, and Jenny said she has a few copies of that, is to show local leagues how you can most effectively and efficiently start working with those people. First of all, since it's not legislators we're trying to influence, you've got to find out who is the person in your community that is the person who makes the decisions on this particular topic. For instance, if we are looking at traffic stops, you know, are you stopping an inordinate number of people of color, you know, in terms of what comes through your community? So obviously the person who's going to have that final say on that really is the police chief, the sheriff, you know. And so the first thing we want people to do is to do a little bit of, what do I want to say, social action. Find out the people in your group who already may have good relationships with that person, number one. You don't want to go in there and create a situation where you're knocking heads with the person who's going to be making the decision. You want to be able to do this on a cooperative basis. So the first thing you want to do is find out who already knows this person. If nobody does, then you just pick out the people who are, I guess I would say, the most diplomatic in your group. A second principle is don't send too many people. I mean, if you were being interviewed by, a bunch of people came into your office or wherever you work and started asking you questions, how would you feel if if you're surrounded by a group of people? Maybe you would get a little defensive. And you've got to realize that if you're asking for a change in policy, or you think you may be asking for a change in policy, you want to eliminate as much of the potential friction between you and the decision maker as possible. So we have some of those ideas. We have, and we have potential ways to ask questions rather than making statements. You start out by trying to create a good relationship with this person, asking questions to see where they are, so that you can really go forward with whatever the policy is. As a matter of fact, we discovered that here, I don't remember what the sheriff was involved, but certainly the Ames Police Department and the ISU Police had already spent 2 years looking at, do they arrest an inordinate number of people in terms of population who, met certain qualifications. They'd already done that. So I think going in with a questioning, finding out what the lay of the land is really your best bet, and not assuming that, not creating a problem where there may not be a problem. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about, and the kind of issues that we're hoping that people in the different leagues around the state will start thinking about. And maybe we can get something done. Ignore the legislature for a while. Just let Amy worry about the legislature and see if we can get some things done. And who's talking about ban the box? Are you? Okay, ban the box is another one, another issue that we chose, besides.
I'm Linda Hansen. I will introduce myself. Otherwise known as Johnny's daughter. Because everybody knows Johnny. So, I'm not like them. I have notes. Maybe. So, when we started thinking about where we could have an impact, something to do with criminal justice or sentencing reform locally, we came up with when I started looking through my notes, we came up with 4 broad areas. One was employment, one was housing, one was the kind of what Mary was talking about, are there the racial disparities? How can we address that? And the other one, I can't remember. Did I say housing? Housing, employment, financial security was another one. And so we decided, we started looking at those issues, and we decided to start with what has come to be known as ban the box. And I'm gonna just tell you briefly what that is, just in case, because I had never heard those terms when we started talking about that. And what that does is it asks employers to consider eliminating questions about prior arrests and convictions on job applications. So you probably all filled out a job application, right? And it says, have you ever been convicted of a misdemeanor? Have you ever been convicted of a felony? Please explain, right? It's taking that off the job application. And the reason for that is that people who have criminal records have a difficult time finding jobs. There's a stigma about it, right? And lack of employment is tied to reoffending. So if we can get people employed, they're less likely to reoffend. So it's not just to be nice to criminals. I mean, I'm not opposed to being nice to people with records. There is something to that, and we've talked a lot about that, that we think all citizens, even those with criminal records, should be treated with some dignity and respect, even those who've done things against the law, and should be afforded opportunities to flourish, right? And so how do we do that? So the goals we sort of always operated with that I kept hearing throughout whenever we were talking was, first, we want to be sure our community is safe. So when we're talking about criminal justice, you always have to kind of go, well, you know, are we doing something that's not safe for our community, right? And so that was, and our workplaces. So if we're talking about work, we want our workplace to be safe. So what Ban the Box does is it has you evaluate a candidate who has a record at the point when you're ready to make an offer and you found out they have a record, right? And you determine if there's a concern based on the nature of the job being offered and the length of time since the offense, right? So for example, you're gonna hire somebody who is gonna do what? Inventory control. They're gonna work with your inventory, right? And 6 months ago, they were convicted of theft. Should you eliminate that person? I say yes. This person's gonna be with their hands in your inventory and they have a recent charge of theft. That's not a safe person to have in your business. So that would be a legitimate reason to not hire somebody. But let's say you have a person who 3 years ago has a misdemeanor charge of shoplifting. And when you're hiring somebody to deliver sandwiches, not related at all, right? Plus, it's a misdemeanor 3 years ago. Like, hire them for whatever. Like, get over it. Because if they haven't reoffended in 3 years and it was this minor charge 3 years ago, it just really doesn't apply. Just get over it. Move on. So we did some research and we found that in those places that have implemented Ban the Box, there's two counties in Iowa, Black Hawk and Johnson, that have implemented Ban the Box. And there's an entire state, the state of Hawaii, back in 1998, like a long time ago, implemented Ban the Box. And the rate of recidivism of reoffending for those with criminal backgrounds goes way down when you do this. So it actually does make our community safer if we do this. Other reasons to do it that we sort of side things were our unemployment rate in Story County right now is like 2%. And we need workers. And here are workers that we could potentially hire who are looking for work. So with all that background and all that information, and when I finally figured out what Ban the Box was, we went and met with the Chamber of Commerce, because that's the logical place to start, right? That's the person we wanted to interact with, somebody who is in touch with a lot of businesses. They were extremely enthusiastic about this initiative and very supportive of it. They invited us, they were having a little conference for the community on hiring people who have justice involvement, and they invited us to come speak about this, which we did. There were, unfortunately, not a lot of businesses there. There were a lot of community service providers there. And so our next plan, which we're still working on, is to take this information, this talk that we have prepared with slides and everything, to other organizations in the community, maybe Rotary or a regular chamber meeting we've talked about, those kind of people that are the business people in town, and let them know about this. So that's what Ban the Box is. That's kind of how we've proceeded with that. And then I've been told that sometimes I have a lot of ideas. And actually, I was talking about, I was asked to say, what are we going to do next? Where are we going next? And when I talked to my mom today, she said, to Johnny today, she said, you know, calm down, you know, just tone it down a little, Linda. So this is my toned down version, okay. So the other area that we spent a whole lot of time talking about was financial implications of being justice involved. And there are 2 members of our committee who have children, me included, and the member who couldn't be here because she was recently in the hospital, who have children who've been justice involved. And when you have that experience, you learn an incredible lot really, really quickly. And so we talked a lot. We kept bringing up over and over again, well, look what this does to these people financially. And so I kind of wanted to just like, since this is like learn with the league, right? Or I'm just, maybe, I don't know. Just try to help you learn that, because if you've never experienced that, this is what this is like. So you all are going to be the person we're talking about here. So you're the sole breadwinner, the family of 4, and you make $20 an hour, so you live in poverty, in case you're wondering. And one day you're speeding home and you're stopped by the police. And they say to you, you were 15 miles an hour over the speed limit and your headlight's up, okay? And you're like, I'm really sorry. I know that headlight's out. I have an old car. It's really complicated to change the headlight on it. You have to get this special kind of bulb, and it's really hard to access. I have to hire a mechanic. It's $120. I've got a quote. I don't have the money, but I'm gonna do it. And the police officer goes, okay, let me see your license and registration. Takes your license and registration, and your registration is expired. 4 months expired. There's a 3-month period when you can have it expired, but it's 4 months. And he says, well, you're driving with an expired registration. And so I have to charge you with that. And so you're charged with speeding, and you're charged with not having your registration up to date. The speeding is $107, the registration's $175. And the registration, which you were trying to get, which you didn't have done, which you need to do, is $125. So you now owe $420. And you can't afford to pay that, right? You couldn't afford to get your headlight fixed. You couldn't afford to pay for your registration. So what are you gonna do? Question, what are you gonna do?
Go to jail.
You're gonna go to jail. You're going to jail. No. I mean, what most people do is nothing. I'm just gonna ignore it, right? So you decide, I'm gonna keep driving, I'm gonna just drive really carefully, and I'm gonna ignore it. And so you do that. You keep driving, hope for the best, and you receive a notice a couple months later from the DOT. It says, your license is now suspended for non-payment of fines, okay? And in order to legally get your license back, you have to pay the DOT a $200 reinstatement fee and set up a payment plan for your fines with the county with a minimum payment of $100 a month. You don't have it, right? So now you have cost of $620 and you have to set up this payment plan. So you have another decision to make. Should you continue to drive on this suspended license with an expired registration and risk further charges? Maybe you could get a job, different job that's closer, that's on the bus route, but how would you pick up the kids from daycare? And all these issues come up, right? And this job actually is a pretty good one that pays $20 an hour. It's hard to find those. So what are you gonna do? And so you make the decision to continue to drive with a suspended license, expired registration, and of course you speed again because you have a speeding habit, and you get charged with speeding, and you're charged for driving while suspended and still having an unregistered vehicle. And guess what? This is the 3rd time you've been stopped. So now you're a habitual offender and you're going to be barred from driving for a year. Now you can get a temporary, what's it called, a temporary license, I can't remember the name of it, that allows you to drive to work and education and pick up your kids, but you can't like go to the grocery store or anything. So you can get that, but you're barred for a full year otherwise. And in order to do that, you have to be on a payment plan, you have to have your registration up to date. You can't afford that. So what do? You drive while barred, right? That's now an aggravated misdemeanor. It's a higher charge. The fine and costs are over $1,000 for that charge. You have to go to court. Okay, you have a court-appointed attorney. You have to get permission from your boss to take a day off to go to court. Your boss threatens to fire you. You're found guilty, and you find out that the law that says that if you need an attorney, it will be appointed for you. True, but after the fact, you have to pay for that attorney, and it's $80 an hour. So you.
Sometimes they charge more than the fine itself.
Exactly, that is very true for some cases. And so you're also told that if you do not register this car, the next time we stop you, we will impound your car. So now what do? I added it up, $3,853 in fines and court costs. You still can't legally drive. You would need at least $500 to just start to drive, to set up a payment plan, to pay the reinstatement fee, to pay for the temporary restricted license, all that stuff, it's $500. So the point of all that is, like when you're experiencing this, it just feels like this hole that you just cannot get out of, or that your loved one can't get out of, and it just keeps getting deeper and deeper, and the debt keeps getting more and more, and the charges go higher and higher, and pretty soon you're looking at jail time and loss of job and etc. And you can see very clearly how poverty impacts these charges. We agree it's unsafe to drive with a headlight out. There are safety reasons to have cars registered and have certainly drivers licensed, right? But because our penalties in our justice system are financial, almost exclusively, or incarceration, right? This disproportionately penalizes people living in poverty. So, we've started some preliminary discussions on this about maybe starting a fund that would help people pay for some of these costs with a means test that says, okay, yeah, you're poor, we'll help you with this. We have initiated conversations with the county attorney and with the person that is in charge of fines recovery for Story County, just some initial email conversation with her to just kind of think about maybe we could talk with them about restructuring that payment plan so that it's more affordable. We also have acknowledged to the county attorney and the police chief at least that, you know, one of the things that happens is that because low-income people in our county are disproportionately people of color or Latinos and Latinas, these policies that penalize people for poverty are disproportionately affecting people of color and result in the disparities we're seeing. And we are still seeing disparities, even though the police chief sat and told us, well, we've done this study and we're not finding that we're doing anything wrong. But why is 4% of Story County, I think it's 4% black, and 25% of the arrests are black then? And his answer was, it's poverty. Maybe. I mean, I think that is probably a significant portion of it. And I think our elected officials that we talked to were all very committed to doing whatever they could to not have disparities. We have an amazing police chief and a really good county attorney, and our sheriff is wonderful. And you know, everybody we've talked to has been really interested in doing what they can to make our community better. But we want to look at how can we eliminate those disparities. So that's just a little bit about sort of what we've done with Ban the Box and some of the ideas that we've come up with. I have a lot more, but I was sort of told to tone it down. So if you want to know what else I have in mind, just come ask me. Or if you're really interested in joining us, we could always use more people to help with, there's a lot of things that we need to do. So join us. And so now I just want to just open it up, and if there's, I think Mary had to leave and go back to rehearsal, right? But if you have any questions for us about the work that we're doing.
Just a quick addition to your example of the person with all the motor vehicle problems. You left out insurance.
Yeah, I thought about that later. I'm like, I'm just not even going to go there.
If you're caught
Not insured, yeah.
$600.
Yes, you're right.
I just have an idea.
Yeah.
Because this perplexed me for a while that we require people to pay back for their attorney. And that seems to be a huge stumbling block. So working with Brian Losey, I asked him how much money we get back from the state. He goes, basically nothing.
Right.
I asked him, so why don't we just stop? And he said, because if it's not, it has to be worth something to you. Now, I think that's a different mindset, and I don't think it really works, because once you're out, and that's, well, at least in the cases that I'm looking at, you're out of prison, now you have to pay back your attorneys. You can't, because, I mean, the stumbling blocks are so huge. And you're aware of them, but not everybody is, because it's, every time I talk to somebody who's trying to go through it, it's so huge. But that seems like one of those, we get no benefit essentially at the state level. We're not collecting any money. And I don't think it's helping. So I feel like that's just one that maybe we could make a back-end way of kind of...
Like, let's not charge for this, because it's not required.
Right.
It's something that we have decided by
And
policy.
I think, as I know you don't want to work the state anymore, I get it.
You don't either?
But I will say, and Amy did mention it, that Brian Losey does tend to want to work with people. He does tend to want to do the, I disagree with him on many things, but he does tend to want to do the right thing. And I think, his answer, well, it isn't worth anything to you unless you have to pay part of it. I think if you think through that process,
It's so...
It doesn't work.
For a while I worked for the county. We initiated a jail diversion program for people with substance use disorders and criminal involvement. And I started that program. And every one of my clients had asked, like $6,000, $7,000, $10,000 that they owed. They're never going to do it. They're not going to go, oh, I need to pay my attorney because that work. It's just not, they're just thinking, how am I going to survive this?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I don't know if it'd go all the way through the legislature, but I think Brian's somebody that we could work with on some of those issues, and I would like to continue to try. So that's one tiny, it seems so
It's
tiny
small.
because people aren't actually paying it, but it would take the burden of the bill coming or that hanging over your head all the time.
One of the things with that is that there are some fees that can be eliminated. That's one of them. And so sometimes a judge from the bench will say, we're going to waive this fee. And if they know that you're having a court-appointed attorney, then you're probably poor. If they know you're on Medicaid, they'll look at those things and they'll be like, we're going to waive this.
Yeah.
So the charges like that can be waived, the fines cannot. You can't waive those.
We've done a little tiny bit, I think, on changing those, but we have a long ways to go.
Yeah. Another one that I was not aware of is if you're in jail, there's a fee to be in jail. It's $55 a day. And it was just changed that we were arguing in our group because we found out it didn't matter if you were found innocent, you still owed that money. And I'm like, what the heck, And they're like, well, we talked to the sheriff, and he's like, well, we provide room and board. And right, but they're still paying. And I love our sheriff, don't get me wrong, I think he's amazing, but I was just like, what? I said, yes.
I think it was the ombudsman, though, that told them they should not do that.
The ombudsman declared this year,
The state ombudsman?
yes, you cannot charge somebody jail fees if they're innocent. So we were ready to fight on that one, and it got eliminated.
So is that a county by county decision?
No, that was statewide. Yeah, it's no longer legal to charge somebody who's innocent for their jail time.
There was just an NPR story that, I think it was Lane County charges $80.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
They all
Yeah.
charge different.
It's all different.
It was Blackhawk.
Blackhawk.
Oh, it was Blackhawk, yeah, that's right.
Was, on NPR, so I should look for that.
There was just a story this week. It was this week, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, last I heard, I haven't had anybody in jail, fortunately, for a few weeks. But it was 55. So maybe it's more affordable, I don't know, but I don't think so. Any other questions?
Well, we didn't ever, any of us, bring up our little slogan, and that was, how can we help? And, I mean, that was an important communication to everybody we interviewed or worked with. How can we help? And it expressed an attitude, we're not here to hurt you. We're here to help you have a better criminal justice system in this county.
Yeah, and as Mary said, that attitude is extremely important because...
Yeah, she talked about the attitude.
Yeah.
We didn't use the name of the words.
We had, I think in particular, one of the people we met with that was extremely nervous. And it was like, we're just here to talk to you and get to know you. Like, you know, how can we help? Settle down. So, thank you.